Welcome to the Podkey summary of Lightning Returns, Final Fantasy XIII. Today's catch-up is all about Lightning Returns, a game that made some very bold calls and got a very mixed reaction for it. It turns the end of the world into a literal ticking schedule, gives Lightning a fast, flexible solo combat system, and ties a lot of its story to grief, guilt, hope, and emotional repair. And underneath all that, it's also a strange, very deliberate attempt to reinvent Lightning herself while closing out the whole Final Fantasy XIII saga. The most distinctive thing about the game is probably the clock. You start with 7 in-game days before the world ends, and if you complete quests you can push that out to 13. Time only really stops in a few cases, like battles, conversations, or when you use chronostasis. So the apocalypse isn't just background mood, it's the structure of the whole game. NPCs show up at specific hours, quests open and close depending on the time of day, and getting around the world becomes part route planning, part exploration, part low-level panic. Some critics loved that urgency because it made the world feel alive and gave every decision some weight. Other critics really did not love it, because if you're the kind of player who wants to wander off, poke at every corner, and treat side quests like a leisurely buffet, the countdown can make that feel weirdly guilty. That split reaction followed the game almost everywhere. For some people, the time limit is the point. For others, it gets in the way of the point. Even people who had major issues with the story or quest design usually agreed on one thing: the combat is strong. Lightning Returns drops the old party-based paradigm system and replaces it with a single-character, style-change, active time battle setup. Lightning carries 3 customizable schemata, and each one has its own ATB gauge, abilities, weapons, and defensive tools. In practice, that means you're constantly switching roles on the fly, building your own rhythm, and reacting fast, instead of waiting for a full party machine to spin up. Reviewers kept praising the speed, the flexibility, and the feeling that you are really authoring your own playstyle. There's a trade-off, though. The system only really works because the game reduced things down to one playable character. The developers were pretty open about what that cost them, which is party interaction. If you loved the banter and character dynamics of a group RPG, this game gives up some of that to make the mechanics sharper. The progression system is doing something interesting, too. Lightning doesn't mainly get stronger through ordinary experience levels. Her growth is tied to completing quests, and very often helping people carry less pain. Main story quests give the biggest stat boosts, while side quests produce erratia, which extends the world's remaining time. So helping people is both the story and the resource loop. A lot of major arcs turn emotional recovery into gameplay. Lightning helps Noel face his guilt, helps Snow recover some hope, wakes Dodge by gathering fragments of his soul, and stops Vanille from being used in a deceptive ritual. It's a pretty direct design choice. Healing people's inner damage is how you move the game forward. And that becomes most explicit with Lumina, who turns out to be the physical embodiment of Lightning's own buried fear, loneliness, and vulnerability. By the finale, the story is asking Lightning to save the world, sure, but also to accept the parts of herself she spent the whole trilogy trying to lock down. The story's larger conflict is built around control, disguised as salvation. Boonevels looks like the figure offering rescue. He promises to restore Sarah, but he's really conditioning Lightning to replace the dead goddess Etro. So when Lightning finally turns against him, the ending reframes salvation as resistance. It's less about obeying a divine plan and more about refusing to be used by one. The setting also treats immortality as a bad bargain. Chaos has stopped humans from aging, but it has also stopped new births. Humanity can't renew itself. People still disappear through illness, violence, and accidents, and the population just slowly thins out. That idea gives the world a quiet kind of sadness. Nobody gets old, but the future is still closing. The climax pushes back against the Order of Salvation's plan to erase the dead so a chosen remnant can fill a new world. Instead, Vanille frees the dead, and the souls of humanity, including Sarah and Lightning's allies, get to choose their own future. That lands the game on autonomy, rather than purity or selection. Behind all of this, the developers were trying to do a reset, without pretending it was a reset. The game was conceived as a rebirth of Lightning and as the conclusion of the 13 storyline, not just a product that happened to be Final Fantasy XIII-3 with a cleaner label. Part of that was character work. They wanted a darker, more vulnerable Lightning, because her earlier stoicism had left some players cold. The design influences are all over the place in a kind of fascinating way. Skyrim for the open world, Dark Souls for some tougher ideas, MMORPGs for the world's almost tourist guide structure, and the film In Time for the countdown pacing. And technically, this was not a simple remix job. The team rebuilt a lot of world systems and NPC behavior from scratch, while overhauling Crystal Tools, which was not originally built for open-world games. The time limit was also rough in testing at first. Players couldn't finish in time, so the team had to make the schedule more forgiving, which feels like a very practical way to discover that end-of-the-world stress has limits. Reception ended up pretty split, and the scores reflect that. On Metacritic, it landed at 66 out of 100 on PlayStation 3 and 69 on Xbox 360. The consistent praise went to the battle system. The common complaints were the time limit, repetitive or trivial quest tasks, dated textures, and a story some critics found underdeveloped or too melodramatic. Commercially, though, it did solidly enough. It sold more than 277,000 copies in its first week in Japan, passed 400,000 there by the end of 2013, and reached about 800,000 worldwide sales by May 2014. Square Enix later said it met expectations, which is a very calm corporate way of saying the sky did not fall. The team also made a point of shipping the complete story in the retail release, after criticism that 13.2's story DLC had made that game feel incomplete. Later DLC mostly stuck to costumes rather than extra narrative chapters, including outfits based on Cloud Strife and Yuna. Lightning Returns is one of those games where the strongest ideas and the most divisive ones are often the exact same ideas. If you click with the clock, the combat, and the emotional angle, there's a lot to admire here. If you don't, 13 days can feel very long. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.